All right, everyone, you made it. Yeah, everyone, you should have known that Curtis and I would have got a bit longer. I mean, we're talking about the plan of redemption, the very shadow picture that encompasses Elohim's will and desire. Like, how do you even reduce it to even a 4-part series?
But it allows for the other parts to be a little shorter now because we can base off the foundation.
So. See, this is where I laughed in Curtis's face when he said that.
Michael.
I just know what you and I like. On our own, never mind together. I mean, gee whiz, like...
It is something when you revisit something that you think you know. I don't know. The lamp continues to cast its light. Are you recording this, Michael?
I am recording this. And I see we've got 2 hands up. In order there on my screen, I'll ask Brenda to unmute there.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you so much for the work you put into these teachings. They are just so mind-blowing.
Well, we hope it blesses you. We have to squash our nerding out a little bit, but we'll nerd out a little bit more during the series. So
yeah, exactly. You were speaking of marriage joining 2 families. And we know of the joining of the 2 houses of Israel and Ephraim, but that seems to be during the time domain. So is that actually a picture of the joining of the family in heaven with the family that was scattered on earth?
I love the question. And what we will say is that obviously everything we've been given in the time domain is to point to the weightier matter. And Curtis and I will speak more on this at Sukkot, but let's remember that Paul says that the conclusion of this plan of redemption is to unite all things, one in Messiah, all things in heaven and on earth. And so, yes, is the short answer. But there's a lot that goes behind that statement. So to just say yes, almost seems to be flippant.
Correct. Remember the words of Messiah before he's about to go to the Ancient Tav. Father, I pray that they are one, right? And how did he tell the disciples to pray? Our Father, right, who art in heaven, set apart be thy name, right? Mm-hmm. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There's a lot going on here. But if we said the test and everything in it, and we'll talk more about this as a code, in and of itself is a greater shadow picture to the real reason, the real thing that's being established here. We're all living the shadow picture and the test, and it's all pointing to something incredible, incredible. Mm-hmm. And so the lamp leads us, right to the end of this great plan of redemption. It doesn't stop almost 2,000 years ago. It's going to take us right to the end. So you've asked a great question. Allow us, not cutting it on Michael there, but allow us to explore what you asked by connecting the dots and a little bit more of a chance to, regarding that question, with what's coming with the teaching. We're kind of laying out things for a reason and foundationally, both with the teachings and then within the teachings, because there's just so much. There's just so much.
It was one of those I jumped ahead type questions.
Yeah, you jumped about 6 to 8 weeks ahead.
Well, at least potentially 1,000 years.
1,000 plus, because we're still here and he's not. So,
Yeah. I will say this, though. Within your question, you've implied that there's a reunification, which implies there was a breaking or a splitting.
he's in heaven and we can't see him, and we're on earth. And so
we have spiritual amnesia too.
Yeah. And it's because of all of those seeds that you have planted over the past teachings that brought me to this. Am I still thinking in the correct path with that question?
If we can consider the classroom of the test, the foreshadowing of it all, then we're right where we should be. But there is something that Paul alluded to at least almost 2,000 years ago. He goes, I dare not speak of yet. Okay, so he's saying it's not the time yet. So somehow he's recognizing something, but he's aware of something, you know. And the question now comes, are we approaching that space where the Father's allowing us to consider matters for the final age? And if so, who would you want to consider it? Maybe that which would be helping you administer it. You see what I mean? It's possible that we're being given, just like Daniel alluded to, this great understandings as we come to the end of the age. But it's not our knowledge and how clever we are and, you know, all this kind of stuff. You know, like we may be purely being the recipients out of his mercy of something that's going down right now. You know, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, all right, because we're in rocky ground in the West, far removed from a lot of the things we talked about today. We're far removed from it. So the fact we're even having that, just the teaching today and the conversations of this Q&A is his mercy. But his mercy is given to those who are in teshuvah, who are in repentance. You see what I mean? Is it possible we're in just enough repentance that we are hearing the extent of the mercy and what this all means? It's possible. Something's going on right now, and it's far bigger than our little spiritual amnesias and, you know, our little lives in the time domain coming to the end of the 2,000 years. But there's also something greater going on in the heavenlies, which perhaps it takes something to be able to hear and see right now at this time. But we're utterly convinced. The Apostle Paul, for instance, most certainly Messiah, but we're, you know, the examples we gave today was the Apostle Paul and King David. We're utterly convinced they knew this. They knew the answer to your question. It's only us that are, like Michael says, we're playing catch up.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure I was hearing correctly what I thought I was hearing.
We're all trying to figure out what we're hearing. Exactly. So let's just keep going together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Brenda, for the question. It's a great one.
Thank you from Oregon. Shine the light there. Oh, by the way, before you go, Brenda.
Huh? Yeah.
I saw your puppy. What was your puppy's name?
His name is Coda.
Let me see Coda.
Coda, come here. Come here, Papa.
Coda will teach you greatly if you let him.
Yes, he does. And he's teaching me that he's bored and I need to get off of this.
He's going, Mama, Shabbat also includes runs for me.
It can. Okay.
Oh, it's nice to meet Coda too. I've come to discover that it's amazing how the creation is an exceptional teacher if we can see it.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what Coda knows and we don't. He just can't tell
right? Well, he speaks quite loud. Okay.
Thanks, Brenda. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you, Coda. Have a good Sabbath, both of you.
All right. We've got Jim. I'll ask you to unmute there, Jim.
Sure thing. I'll get the video. Shabbat Shalom, brothers.
There we go. Shabbat Shalom.
Oh, we get a face as well. Awesome.
May Yah bless you and keep you both, and also everyone part of the broader community together today. Something really stirred in me in kind of going through this evolution of the marriage covenant in the ancient Hebrew wedding ceremony. And I loved how you laid out this evolution going from the very beginning of Genesis, and those small bits of the mysteries and the deeper hidden truths that are gleaned from each of those passages that reveal things. But when you brought it full circle to what the marriage covenant was when Yahshua was born into this world, something like clicked for me. And I just want to make sure I'm not off base in this. And I don't know if this will go into a different portion of what your teachings will be down the road, either in this teaching series or during Sukkot. But when you brought up Mary and Joseph, what really seemed to stand out for me was the fact of the matter that during this betrothal period, she was expecting. And so she had the seed of the Ruach HaKodesh in her then. And I'm curious if that is indeed a shadow picture of what we expect for the bride of Messiah in this age to come, which is when we think of the bride, we see passages, and I think back to what Curtis had mentioned in his teaching from the last series, and I think referencing Romans 5, which was talking about the endurance that produces character producing hope, and that hope not bring us to shame, which made me think about how it would have been for Mary in having to endure the gossip and slander and things like that. But ultimately says, because Yah's love, or Elohim's love, has been poured out into our hearts through the Ruach HaKodesh, who's been given to us. And so, again, what kind of clicked for me is just all this flood of different scriptures when I think of all the references and illustrations that Yahshua alluded to in his prophetic foreshadowing of the full Moedim and what would come, is tribulations and relating that to birth pains. And so are we seeing him allude to, in essence, that his bride will be indeed bearing child and giving birth? And I guess, again, the other follow-up question is that is allusion to what we see in Revelations 12, which is the woman in the wilderness.
Are you meaning in your analogy, because I'm trying to get there with your thought process, are you alluding to it as in liken to he's entrusting with his bride the understanding of the birth of Messiah?
Yeah, in essence, that we're carrying that within, or his bride is carrying it within
us.
Yeah, at that time when the consummation will be. But I oftentimes hear a lot of allusions, or although we don't know a specific time and day of when his original or first coming birth was into the world, there's a lot of speculation that it could have been Yom Teruah.
It's interesting. I'm seeing it because it's interesting, because the physical shadow picture was Mary, but the spiritual shadow picture is there a bride that's being entrusted to give birth to the understanding of Messiah? That's a really neat way to look at, because it is coming to this place. Who's going to deliver the true gospel? And
will she have to bear shame because of it as well?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And ironically, to then tie that back to Shechem, who was it that murdered Shechem? Those in the house. Who are we warned of by Messiah? Not the Romans, those in the house,
That's a interesting way to consider the progression of the shadow picture that we're in. I need to think a bit more on that, Jim, but that's an interesting it's an interesting task, because, she is going to carry the understanding and the intimacy of her groom. And that's Messiah. Is this being carried with us, in that way that you're, analogizing it?
I wonder if this would then tie into Parable of the Talents. You've set me off on a
Yeah,
tangent.
I'm connecting and looking at some things there. It's quite interesting because that was given, that physical picture with Miriam was given almost 2,000 years ago. So what's that representing? It's always pointing to a weightier spiritual matter, you know? So is that a way of understanding it in the sense of those who will shine like the stars? Does she have a job now to get Messiah to the rest of them? You know, I mean, and can that be linked to the shadow picture of Miriam and Joseph? That's interesting, you know, in that sense as a direct correlation. Because I agree with the outcome of the statement, you know, but is this directly pointing to it? That's what's fascinating about what you just said.
I guess the other thing that made me think of it too is when, obviously, in various locations and in Gospels, which is what Joshua says, is "Depart from me, I never knew you," and knowing that's a much more deeper, intimate sort of knowledge of now at a heart level of knowing someone at a very intimate level from a bridal standpoint.
Yeah, well, the Ruach's residing in us now, according to Messiah's words. So, and that's supposed to be at an intimate level.
And it is called the Spirit of Messiah by Paul in some places, you know, so.
I can't immediately go, well, no, this is why it can't. Do you know what I mean? And in my experience in this, if I can't do that, then I want to know why. You know, and so I'm going, why can't I just write off that analogy? You know, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's because we shouldn't be. You know, are all the pieces there to at least consider this weightier spiritual matter, you know, building upon itself, you know? I think it has real merit, the analogy. I really do in that sense. Especially given what both Miriam and Joseph would have gone through. You know, somebody had mentioned in here, they were taking the slander and the gossip and the stripes, you know, right from the point of this. And the only thing protecting them was their character and this covenant process that them and Elohim were honoring. Like it's without this window to do this, then the accusations and the slander would have had merit. But they don't have merit righteously because of something we've been discussing today as a foundation, you know, and we had to deliver that today in order to be able to now point to, you know, because the lamp's going to take us further now, where we're going to start to look at, okay, well, you know, what were we seeing develop in this? What did Torah talk about? What did the prophets understand, you know? So, yeah.
I don't take any more time, but one other thing just kind of that triggered why I was starting to go down this thought process was during our DS meeting last week. Actually, we were talking about the unforgivable sin, and obviously one of those portions is not blaspheming. The portion is not blaspheming the Ruach HaKodesh, and you know, in the bridal sense, is that again speaking against the bride of Messiah that bears the Ruach.
Well, we know for sure it most certainly will in the age to come. Mm-hmm. That's a guarantee. What comes against the final encampment is against the bride and the groom. Mm-hmm. And we know she's serving, you know, as a part of his governance, right? So we know that's 100% truth, you know, from the word. So I don't know, Michael, what you think on that, but I most certainly, I don't know how that's not possible either, you know, in that sense of, you know, the thought process, because we know where it's going, you know. And in fact, she's carrying out all the attributes of the character of Messiah during this time. You know, but it's fascinating how you see it in these key players from David to, you know, Yaakov, Joseph, Messiah, Paul. They're all demonstrating the character of Messiah. Joseph and Miriam, we're demonstrating this. And we do take our lashes. You know, there's stripes, you know, as a result of that. Often from the religious, by the way. In fact, more often from the religious. We got
Yeah,
some
I mean,
we got some geeking out that's coming, so it's going to help a little bit with that question, just so you know.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Today was more of a foundation, actually, so that because we need to look at the appointed times, how they fit into, an ancient Hebrew wedding understanding. We're going to look at, there's going to be a part on, the divorce remarriage, because remember, we've got betrothal, then that betrothal was divorced, and now the wedding is back on. How is that even possible without breaking, all these, because this is the essence of the plan of redemption. And so these things are coming.
One thing's for sure, Jim. Lamp unto our feet now, but apparently will shine as bright as a star. Well, our sun is a star, right? So you think about this. What's the lamp going to become? It's going to cast a great light. And is it possible as we get closer to Messiah, that lamp is casting more and more? And what happens? The light causes the darkness to scatter.
Amen.
Its presence is just pushing this back. So, is the lamp starting to burn brighter at this time as we get closer and closer to the bridegroom? We think it is. That's why we wanted to start off with the name of the series and whatnot. That, we're starting off looking at things, but suddenly as we get closer and closer to Messiah, it's like it's starting to illuminate a lot of stuff. So, anyway, great questions.
Thank you, Jim. Man, it's Curtis and I, we joke about how when we put a teaching together, like about 30 to 40% of it doesn't make it to the teaching because we just end up going here, there, and everywhere. It's just the way it is. And, revisiting this topic, Curtis, has brought me much joy. I will say that.
Well,
I mean,
we were both hanging out to get here because we're doing the other series, knowing where we're going, and then it's one of those things where you're kind of like, and it's our chance to grow and learn too.
Yeah.
So we just want to do that and choose to do that with those whom we serve. So that's really what it's about. Hopefully, we're all going to grow and learn out of this.
Yeah. Well, since we've gone long today, I'm going to do the blessing. Yah will bless you, and he will guard you. Yah will shine his countenance upon you, and he will be gracious to you. Yah will turn his countenance toward you, and he will grant you shalom. Everybody, have a blessed week. Enjoy the rest of your Shabbat where you're all at. And looking forward to continuing this journey with you all next week.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.